You know, when people talk about the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly, it really is that. Like you become pregnant and you start to go into a cocoon and you quite literally turn to goo. Your brain turns to goo, who you are, your sense of identity turns to goo. And the process of emerging from that cocoon is also a process. It's not a single moment.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Journey Journals. My name is Gaia from Life of Gaia, and today's interview is going to be about the sacred journey from maiden to motherhood via the sacred birthing process. I'm very, very excited to have Ellanah Fawcett here with me today. She is a trained doula, a new mother, and is also a prenatal yoga instructor. A warm welcome to you, Ellanah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on here, Gaia. I love speaking about this topic, so yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Likewise, I'm excited to talk to you about it too. So, this interview, as I said, is about the sacred journey from maiden to motherhood. And so, if you are considering having children, or if you are pregnant, or if you are already a mom, or you're just curious about, the birthing process and sometimes the fear that comes with it, then this interview is definitely for you. So, we're going to jump right in. And Ellanah, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to just introduce yourself and let viewers know about you.
Of course, so I am a mother of a 17-month-old baby boy. He's my first baby in this life and was such a huge agent of transformation. Before him, I'd been nomadic for a decade, teaching yoga around the world, sharing holistic therapies. And this little guy came along and really taught me a lot already. He's still kind of a fresh sprout in this world.
Yeah, and he's absolutely gorgeous. I've seen him a couple of times, and congratulations for that. Ellanah, what was the pivotal moment for you on this journey from maiden to motherhood, and the whole sacred birthing process?
I feel like there's not one moment. It's really a whole process, a really, really deep process. You know, when people talk about the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly, it really is that. Like you become pregnant and you start to go into a cocoon and you quite literally turn to goo. Your brain turns to goo, who you are, your sense of identity turns to goo. And the process of emerging from that cocoon is also a process. It's not a single moment. I mean, for me, I'm still emerging from this cocoon like more and more. And each time kind of a new chapter of that emergence happens, I'm like, oh, wow, I'm discovering kind of new senses of kind of expansiveness in my wings and who I am now. So it's a whole journey that's very hard to pin down a moment of sudden change. I mean, there's the birth itself, which in and of itself is kind of that. I mean, it's the moment of kind of gestating life within to suddenly this life being outside and everything changing forever. Can never turn that back.
Yeah, I'm sure it's quite the experience. And you are a trained doula. And how did that training sort of shape your understanding of the whole birthing process and at the same time influence your journey into motherhood?
So that training was key for me in my birthing process. I actually trained during pregnancy, and my partner and I had a very interesting birth where our birth team, we weren't able to birth with them. And so I ended up doulaing us and kind of guiding my partner, who is incredible. I mean, he was very intuitive in his space holding of the journey, but it was integral in empowering me with the wisdom and knowing that we could do it ourselves, and to have an understanding of the birth process, of the hormones that are involved in it, of the like necessity of pain, actually, like the role that pain plays in the birth process, and why we shouldn't necessarily actually run from it, and the roles the hormones play, and how to kind of move through the contractions with more ease. And it also left me with a real confidence in myself to be able to advocate for myself, because I mean, the more you learn about it in the medical system, it's crazy. And it's very far from actually kind of what we need as women, and also what we need as babies coming into the world, to be fully supported and to have the most kind of harmonious births possible. And our birth is such a huge imprint on who we become as adults in this life. So that for me was really, really key, to just have that understanding within myself.
That's amazing. And I wanted to speak to you about expectations versus actual experience. And, you mentioned that your expectation was that you were going to have a birthing team present, but that didn't quite unfold for whatever reason. And then there was a different experience. And I wanted to ask, were there other expectations that you had around the whole birthing process that differed from the actual experience? And how those help transform your actual journey?
Yes. There were a lot. Um, and I feel like that's part of what actually is it the key of what we need to learn as women going into birth is, you can make a plan, but you just have to throw it completely out of the window. And it's when you're going in as a first time mother, it's something you've never experienced before. And the sensations are strong. I mean, it's a strong process. And I think for me, one thing, I didn't realize quite how strong it was going to be. So that was something I was like, wow, okay. It's kind of like setting sail on your ship, and you're like, I know there's a bit of a storm out there, but like, I've got this. Like I know how to breathe, and I know how to pull the sails and stuff. And then getting there and being like, wow, this is actually the biggest storm I've ever encountered in my life.
Wow.
And I'm gonna have to like almost like learn as I go and be creative and intuitive as I go, because this is beyond anything. And I think that's the thing with birth, is it's like this miracle, and it's the most natural thing. We're all here because of birth, but we really like cannot conceptualize it in the body until you go through it.
And I hear that fear plays a really, really big part of it. As you mentioned, you're going into the unknown, especially with the first birth and the first journey into motherhood. How did sort of fear play a role and manifest in your body during pregnancy and birth?
So that is a big piece, the fear of the unknown. And yeah, I feel for me, there wasn't a huge amount of fear actually of birth, because of all of the training and research I'd done and the understanding I gave myself of it. There was fear that came up when our baby came early, so we weren't near our birth team. There was a moment there. And for me, a lot of actually the deeper fear was also about the aftermath, like the being a mother and the being changed forever. But there's also, I read this beautiful book by Pam England that I would highly recommend to any woman who is pregnant, who is looking to conceive. And she speaks about the unknown of the birth process. And I think it's the myth of Persephone, to remember exactly which goddess it is, who goes into the underworld, and she's given all these tools and gifts to use on her journey through the labyrinth. And slowly she loses all the tools, because actually they weren't the right tools, and she gets to the end and she's changed forever, and she comes back with a whole new set of tools, not the ones she
Mm.
went in with. And that can be really scary. I remember reading that actually and being like, oh gosh. Oh gosh, that's
About to lose all my tools.
yeah, I was like, I thought my tools were like, I thought I had this down. I've got my tools, I've got my breathing, I've got my like awareness of how the contractions go. When actually, really, what you need, I mean, you need the tools and the understanding, but really what you need is that just like deep presence and allowance and connection with intuition.
And Ellanah, speaking of tools, I know you lead women's circles, womb healing circles, and you make use of a number of tools, like yoga nidra, breath work, craniosacral therapy, and you also make use of psilocybin, which I'm a big fan of in healing work. The results have just been incredible time after time. The research is proving equally incredible. And I wanted to ask, how does your work with psilocybin, how did it contribute to transforming the fear and really enhancing your connection to the sacred birthing journey?
It was absolutely integral to it. So for me, I had a journey during pregnancy, not a large dose, just a little one. So very sensitive to those things. But it was enough to really transform the fear in me. And what happened for me on that journey was I was shown fear through my body. Suddenly I had a big wave of fear. It's like my whole body went into a fear state. And then I kind of questioned, like, okay, well, like, what do we do with this? And the psilocybin showed me and guided me through how to drop beneath the fear. And it showed me this incredible, immense power of love that's actually beneath the fear. And it felt like this divine mother love. And so when we were in the birth process itself, when we were in labor, I had this moment of fear come up when we were kind of, our plan was not our plan anymore. And we had to really kind of be like, okay, how, like, this is happening. And we're 6 hours drive from the nearest hospital. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to have anyone come and help us. In the end, a student midwife, who was beautiful, did come and support us during the middle of the night. But we didn't know if we were going to have that. And the contractions came on really fast, really sudden. There wasn't really a break between them, which was another expectation that wasn't
Met.
yeah, wasn't met. And so I had this moment of fear that was like, oh my gosh, we're going to do this right here and we have no choice. And the moment I felt that fear, it took me back to that journey and it moved through so fast. It was really just like a moment, like a tiny, tiny moment. And I really believe it's because of that journey with psilocybin. Because what happened then was I welcomed that love that I'd felt on that journey, that divine mother love, that love that's beneath the fear, that really the fear is desiring that love, like that the fear actually just needs to be held by that love. And it had been such a strong experience that it was still very present for me in my mind and my energy. And so I welcomed that in, and the fear immediately dissolved. And after that, there was no fear through the birth process at all. Even we had a little, our son he had a nuclear arm at the end, so he got a bit stuck. And the fear didn't come back then. It was just this deep, deep trust. I mean, it was still intense. It was still a wildly intense journey, but the fear had been held by that journey with psilocybin.
Well done for navigating through that. And I love what you said about, fear in general. And then you mentioned dissolving fear. And, I wanted to speak into that for a moment because I think it's really, really important. I had a similar experience in a medicine journey of a very, very fearful event, right? And at an integration circle the next day, I was voicing this fear. And one of the people in the circle said to me, you need to understand that fear feeds on fear, right? So the more fearful you become, the bigger the fear gets. And he said, if you have the courage to actually walk straight into it and meet it head on, it dissolves or it turns into a flower or it transforms. And so I've applied it ever since, actually. And it actually works. It's incredible. It literally dissolves in front of you. So it was just interesting that you used the word dissolve around the fear and how you experienced, because I've had very similar experiences. It's quite lovely because you get to see it for what it is.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I feel like there's so many quotes they have on that of like when you turn around and see like you actually see it, it's not even scary itself.
Yep.
Yeah. And such you're reminding me of a mama friend who I spoke about this with, the fear aspect of things. And she did a lot of work on that herself. And she wrote out every single fear she had, down to things like, I'm afraid my baby might die during labor. I'm afraid I might die during labor. And her process with it was exactly what you shared, like looking head on at it. And like she also just like accepted it. Like, yeah, I
Mhm.
might die. My baby might die. And there's a bigger working to things. And she said it became much less scary when she did that, that it was kind of, she'd accepted it and been like, yeah, that is a possibility.
Yeah. Without accepting it, it traps you. So you hold women's circles and you have a lot of these conversations like the one you just mentioned with your friend. And, these circles involve creating sacred space for deep connection and healing, right? How do these circles support women in embracing their journey from maidenhood to motherhood?
So I'm actually about to start a new circle that's very much focused on that. At the moment, the circles I run are more general around women. So it's not necessarily something that always comes up, but the new circles I'm going to run are very much going to be focused on that because it's a rite of passage that in many ways we've forgotten how to support women through. And it's a death, it's an actual death, it's a death of a persona. And so it comes with a lot of grief. And I feel like that process actually just wants to be witnessed and heard. So these circles are going to be very much based around speaking to a different theme around that each time. It's going to be mainly for new mothers in their first few years of motherhood, or those really wanting support through pregnancy. But a large part around it is the healing effect of just being heard from a space of kind of loving listening, and how that can help us deeper accept where we are and surrender to where we are, because you can't avoid that death. Like if you're on that journey of the maiden to mother, like death is part of it and we can't run from it. So kind of like you were saying with the fear, it's like you actually have to turn and look to the death. And when we do that in support with one another, it can help us through that with more ease, with more grace. So each time there'll be a different theme based around that to all speak to and support one another through. And I mean, some women might be really having challenging things come up, and also some women have very blissful experiences to share. So there's also the piece of inspiration, but there's often a lot for us to receive in hearing people too and listening. So it's being listened to, but also listening. And kind of traditionally as well, if we look back, women really did things more collectively. Like if you look back to kind of like more like indigenous tribal days, and like we are all indigenous to a land. So it's also like looking back through kind of, well, for me, my European roots, women tended to do things together. Like they would weave together, they would kind of cook or like do planting, gardening, raising the children, creating. Like there was this creativity that was always shared that can be lost a little bit in the modern day. So there's also an intention of that, of kind of like, well, how can being in a collective offer more support to these really deep processes that can be very challenging at times?
It sounds like you're very connected to, ancient wisdom and ancient modalities and ways of being. How do you incorporate some of these, ancient traditions and ancient wisdom into your healing circles?
Yeah, so well, for me, I've always been drawn to the Eastern wisdom teachings since I was a little girl. I remember being fascinated by anything to do with China, Japan, or India. And then the first place I went at 18 was India. So for me, I really like to bring in a lot of the yogic teachings. And I also feel they offer perspective. I mean, at the heart of yoga is this reunifying oneself with all of life. I mean, it's not even a reunifying, it's just a remembering and a realizing that that's happening. And that can offer a wider, loving perspective and context for these journeys. So that's one aspect of the yoga. I also teach prenatal yoga and yoga nidra, which I weave in, which I feel like offers a lot of wisdom on the somatic, on supporting the process, bring a holistic perspective. And then I'm now living over in Costa Rica, so closer to Mexico and Peru and a few other countries that have really rich teachings on birth, pregnancy, and women's work. And I'm just starting to dabble more into this side of the world. I mean, everything was focused on
Mhm.
Asia for so many years. And it's very earth-based here. So
Are
those
you able
Eastern.
to connect with local communities and local women around the birthing process?
Not so much here in Costa Rica, but in Mexico and Peru, which is a dream to go down there. And actually our midwife, she's on an amazing trip at the moment around the world, connecting with different traditions to learn their ancient kind of teachings. Was really blessed to receive a closing of the bones ceremony, which is a kind of an old ceremony for women after birth, You wait normally about 40 days, 6 weeks, or even longer. You can have it years later. And you get wrapped in the rebozo. And it's about kind of calling the woman's essence back to herself, closing herself after she's opened really wide for birth. And it was fascinating to learn actually about that from the really beautiful woman who came and held that ceremony for us. And so that sparked a lot of fascination because, yeah, there's these times I feel need ceremony. They need ritual. They need those deeper rites of passage ritual to really help us through them and help us let go and shed of who we were. So I'm fascinated to learn more about those traditions, and also slightly fascinated too. I read a really beautiful post I remember last year that then was part of someone's podcast from this woman who does closing of the bones, and she was like, you can also create your own ceremonies around this and tune into yourself and what you need as a woman to shed and step into your new skin. And that's something that's kind of been a seed percolating for me, where I'm like, oh, like, how can we also create our own like ceremonies and rituals for this?
Yeah, rituals being such an important part of the whole process and life in general. And I love that about the closing. It's called the closing of the bone. I'd never ever heard of it before. And, like a lot of older ancient traditions, there's probably a part of it that's even rooted in science and health benefits around it. I'm curious to look into that. It sounds incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Ellanah, what advice do you have for women who may be experiencing some kind of fear or uncertainty, going into the birthing process for the first time and this big transition into motherhood?
Definitely to explore that fear. So just like you were saying earlier, of really, really looking at the fear and inquiring into it. And if you as a woman listening, if this is you, to also kind of seek out if there's a friend who you can speak to, who can be a mirror for you and an ear for you. Perhaps it's a woman who's already gone through it herself, who can kind of hold you, and because she'll know about those fears herself, because she probably had them in her own way. But really looking at the fear and inquiring, like, what is this fear? What's beneath this fear? What does this fear need? How does it feel just to allow that could be a possibility? I think that's some advice that I would give, but definitely to seek support as well from women who've been through it. I think that's one of the key things too, is it's amazing to have support from friends who haven't and who can bring a lot of lightness to it, but it's really key to have that wisdom of women who've crossed that threshold.
Yeah, it's almost like seeking out the advice of the elders that would be in a tribe. Yeah, agreed. Ellanah, what is your overarching message to the world?
I think one of my main messages for women around birth is to remember that it's the most natural thing in the world, that it's how you arrived here. It's how every being on this planet arrived here, that so many women before you have given birth, and that it's a miracle, and that you have the capacity to birth a miracle, that you are a miracle, and to really know the birth that you desire and to fiercely advocate for that and to face all the fears that you have around it in order to fiercely and lovingly kind of protect it and empower it.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Ellanah, and a huge thank you to you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your gentleness. Thank you for your love. And thank you for being a mom and for holding space for other mothers. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gaia. You received that.
And thank you for joining me here on the interview. And for those of you who have been listening, and if you know of a new mom or someone who's thinking of embarking on the journey of motherhood, please share this video with them. Please like, comment. I encourage you to connect with Ellanah through the comments below. I'll also be posting a link to her website, to her women's circles, and I highly, highly encourage you to connect with her. Thank you again for watching, and thank you, Ellanah.